Hey Tom, nice to see you again. Sorry we couldn't have you both in the shot at the same time, but we're trying to keep our distance at the moment. This is your latest restoration project, and wow, it looks amazing, Tom.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, congratulations to
Thank
you both. How has this been then, as one of your many restorations? How's it worked out?
This has been a lot of fun, and I would like to thank Malcolm for having this opportunity for me to do this for him. And what got me really interested in doing this project was the story behind it that Malcolm has mentioned. It's the legacy that when he was sitting on this bike when he was just a young person, and it belonged to his grandfather and passed down through his family, and now has it in his family and will pass it on to his daughter at some point. So I'm very pleased to be able to have the opportunity to do this. So as Malcolm mentioned, this is a 1944 Triumph 3HW, which is built as a war bike in World War II. And these bikes were shipped all over the world in areas that the British were involved in conflicts. And a lot of them went to India, where this came from. Many of these then were war surplus. Some of them were sent to dealers. And I suspect that's where Malcolm's grandfather got it. He probably bought it out of war surplus, a civilian bike. As this would have come off the factory, it would have had some different things than what we did here, and one of them be the color. It was more of a army green color. It would have had a large rack here that you could either put a cargo on, or it could even be used for seating. One of the strategies that Malcolm and I did with this bike is we knew it wasn't going to be as a strictly military restoration. It was going to be a civilian bike. So we wanted to try to have something that would be kind of like the period for bikes of that era. If you look at this bike, its technology is pre-war, and it's very similar to a pre-war Tiger 80, which was a single-cylinder 350cc overhead valve. And this bike has a lot of those kinds of features in there, and that's what they started with. Triumph submitted a number of designs to the British government to try to meet the specifications they were looking for. And they had two that kind of came out of that from all the work that they did was this 350 overhead valve single and a 500 single that was a side valve. And so those are the two primary ones they used during the ship to the war. And the numbers that I could see from this bike was that there was on the neighborhood of 20,000 motorcycles shipped based on the contract information. If anybody familiar with some of the pre-war bikes, they would know one of the big things is it has a girder front end, which was the technology was used at the time. It's very similar to the Tiger 80, but they did some modifications to it, I think, for use in the war effort and also for cost issues. And at that time, they were also trying to conserve aluminum. So the original Tiger 80 civilian bike pre-war, if you look at the area here, it had the top rocker box was aluminum. And to save aluminum, they recast the head and put the rocker box in the cast iron of the head itself. And so it made it a little heavier, but they were really concerned about aluminum. The other thing on this side here, the original civilian bikes were aluminum primary case. And again, to save aluminum, and I think also for cost reasons later on, they went to a stamped metal, sheet metal, primary inner and outer cover. And so that's what this has. It has enough attachment screws where it's able to get it to be pretty oil tight. So that's always a challenge with some of the Matchless and Nortons and such. In this era where they used the sheet metal primary case, it was always very difficult to get them to seal up properly. Another big thing was there was a big rack, and then the attachments for the fender were mounted in the rack. So what we had to do is basically redesign this to be like a pre-war civilian bike. So in those, they would have the grab rails and the uprights, the stays here. So Malcolm wanted to be able to show the curve of the rear fender rather than having a pillion seat here. And I think it was an excellent choice. The motor is, as I mentioned, 350 single and overhead valve. So we went through the whole motor. I kind of made sure everything was correct on it. It turns out it had a pretty new piston and a new bore. And so all we had to do there was to do the honing on the bore and then a new set of rings, and that worked out quite well. On the bottom end, what I did was replaced the valve lifters and all that. I decided to just go all new, and it seems to work pretty well because seems to be a pretty tight motor. The biggest challenge were finding parts for this. When I got the bike, it was all in pieces because that's how it came from India to get it out of the country. Because India has a very damp climate, there was a lot of rust on some of the parts, and so we had to deal with that. So what I ended up doing was to mock the whole bike on the bench so I could make sure everything fits properly and find out what things were missing and be able to find those. One of the key things was missing was the speedometer, so I was able to find a speedometer. It's kind of interesting. It's got a illumination, but it doesn't have a trip odometer on the war bikes. And the other thing is it's a Smith Jagger, so it's got the pre-war logo on it, which was correct for those years. And we took a little bit of liberties here because the original war bike would have had a little slot in here to try to keep the light from spraying everywhere during the war. Basically, they use the same MU-42 style with a switch and the ammeter here. So it's pretty similar, except for lens we used is similar to pre and post-war cat's eye Lucas lens. It was really a challenge trying to get the front end rebuilt because all of these girder front end had bushings that were all worn out. And so I have a machinist friend of mine who made all the bushings for it, and it just came out really, really great. Fortunately, the front end was in quite good shape because sometimes you see these girder front ends and they're just really trashed, and they're bent and they're cut, and but this one was pretty good as far as the basic structure of it, so that helped quite a bit. And one of the things I do on all my restorations is I have a fellow down in Northern California who used to work at Buchanan's, and he's got all their frame straightening equipment. He's got all the specs, and he can check the frame, and these old frames, especially these old rigid frames, they're all bent because they're not very strong. He also did the same thing with the girder front end after I had the bushings put in so that it would have the proper clearance and everything. So that was kind of the fundamental to start out with. And we had to do quite a bit of work, and the sheet metal. The tank required a lot of work. I had a fellow in Northern California who I've used in the past who's an artist with sheet metal, and he had to completely rebuild the tank. The bottom end had so many patches and welds that were not very well done. And even though you don't see it, I just couldn't let it go. And he actually rebuilt it such that it looked like the factory. If you get underneath it, it looks like complete factory. And so that worked out really well. The other thing that's really a challenge, there's probably parts that I had to find over a 2-year period. We did the restoration of course, from England, Austria, Australia, New Zealand, Greece, Canada, you name it. Even sourced some parts from India as well. And so it was a challenge finding these. And there's a few things I could not find and ended up making them. My friend Larry Jones up in Vancouver is an excellent machinist, and he did a number of things for me. One of them being we couldn't find this little head steady for the bike. I had a picture of one, and so I made some dimensions, and he made it from that, and it worked out really great. A few other things we had to source that just were very hard to find. So it is made for an interesting challenge. Anybody who's done a pre-war bike can understand that because they're just very hard to find. The rear wheel is pre-sprung hub, and so the wheels that they used for the rigid frames prior to sprung hub and prior to 1950 were conical roller bearings. Those are difficult to find. They're really hard to find for the rear one. It's the same as the twins, the pre-war twins and post-war, immediate post-war twins. That was hard to find, but I was able to find those because there was a few more of those around. What was even more difficult, though, was on the girder front end. The wheel bearings for that were a conical roller bearing, but they're a different size. They're smaller, and those were. You think these were hard to find? These were really hard to find. I managed to find a vintage bearing house in England that had them, but those were just very difficult to come across. So anybody who's done a pre-war Triumph twin or single would appreciate the challenges associated with that.
The colour is beautiful. I'm assuming that's the famous Triumph Amaranth thread, is it?
Yes, it's the Amaranth red color. Malcolm and I discussed a number of options, and I have a pre-war Speed Twin that he really liked the color of, and kind of used that as a model. And some of the things from the features too will kind of emulate the pre-war bikes. If this was an original Tiger 80 pre-war, it would have silver paint on it. But this is such an elegant color, and the fact of doing it all that way with the pinstriping, it really brings a lot of elegance to how it shows. And all the pinstriping, of course, done by Mitch, and he's just so talented in that. And also did for the badges as well, the paint and the badges, and the lettering on the number board. So all of that was really fun to be able to work with those guys. And Rob Benko did the painting, and he's just an excellent painter and is really meticulous. And he wouldn't let it go out of his shop until it was perfect. So it was nice to have somebody like that on the team. This is similar to what was done from pre-war through probably mid-50s. If you look at, there's the painted stripe in the center of the chrome wheels with the pinstriping. That is a very time-intensive thing. And first of all, you have to get the rims painted before you do any lacing up at all. And so they're chrome wheels, so what the painter has to do is to mask off everything and roughen up that area so you can get a bite to the paint. And then of course there's the coats of the primer, and then the color coats, and then the clear on top of that, and then Mitch gets it to do the pinstriping. And then you've got this beautiful wheel, and then you got to poke spokes into it everywhere. That's sort of a nervous process, let's say.
No pressure or
no
anything.
pressure at all. It was a lot of fun, and it was, for me, I've done quite a few pre-unit Triumphs, but this is the first one I've done with girder front end.
And the restoration process, working with Malcolm, sounds like it was a very enjoyable project to
great,
work on together as
great
well.
working with Malcolm, because he was just so, interested and cooperative, and was very involved in the process all the way. So, and we kind of kept each other up to speed on the thinking, and I kept sending him photos as the process went on, and so, kind of kept not only just finished photos, but photos of the piston sticking out, and the assembly of the transmission, and all of that. And this has the Magdyno, which took quite a bit of work. There was a lot of worn parts in there, and so Greg is one who did those. He has a treasure trove of stock parts, so we were able to tap into that to find the ones that were not usable, and so it works really well. One thing I found out about this that I did not know, that Greg told me, bikes of this era, up until I think it's 1951 or 52, the Triumphs were negative ground. And then we all know British motorcycles as being positive ground. Yes. Well, that started in the early 50s on up, but before that it was negative ground. So that's something something I learned on this that I didn't know before.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Tom. I suppose before we finish, the question on everyone's lips is, will it start? Would you be willing to start it for us?
Sure, I will. Okay?
Brilliant.
First off, we have to turn on the gas. And then you have a mechanical advance, which has to be retarded. And then you have a choke on the carburetor, which has to be fully on. And then you come down and you bring it to top dead center, and you've got a compression release like most singles do. And you just go past compression release. Well, let's try. Then to stop it, you push the compression release. That's how it stops. There's no switch.
Wonderful. Oh, that sounds lovely.
Sounds solid, doesn't it?
Thank you very much to you both. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Really enjoyed that. It was so much fun. Thank you. Ah, beautiful.
Brings a smile to you.
It does, doesn't it? That sound, you can't beat a single, can you?
I know. Yeah.
Oh, they're so good.
I'm so
that's-
used to twins that I
know.
say, I can't understand. It's only running on one cylinder.